In case you missed the announcement at the beginning of our previous episode with Nian Yang, I have a new game out. All Our Yesterdays is available right now on my itch for Pay What You Want, and links, of course, will be in the show notes. Warning: this episode contains some strong language. Listener discretion is advised. Hello, and welcome to Tales from the Trunk, reading the stories that didn't make it. I'm Hilary B. Bisnieks. Listeners, I'm super excited today to welcome, for the first time to this show, one of my oldest writing friends, honestly. Aimee Kuzenski is an author, a narrator, an amazing martial artist, just a fantastic all-around person. Aimee, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Hilary. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. I was kind of shocked when I asked you, hey, do you want to be on this show? Like, wait, how? Why didn't I have Aimee on before?
There are lots of writers in the world, and I'm just glad you got around to me. That's the important thing.
That is the important thing, absolutely. So you're going to be reading from Tilted. Is there anything we need to know about it before we get in?
Yes. This scene is early on in the novel, but a couple of important things happened in the first few bits before this. So we have a world in which zombies are an integrated part of life.
Mm-hmm.
The world is vaguely Victorian steampunky. The main character, at least in the first scene, is a woman named Hélène de Martine, who at the end of the first scene is horrifically murdered in front of her son.
Mm-hmm. I remember this well.
Yes. The only thing you have to know starting off after this is that the servants of the nobility are called revenants, and they are people who died as a result of some sort of violence.
Mm-hmm.
And Hélène, because she was murdered, she is going to wake up with enough sensibility and biteability to serve as a servant in a different home. People who die as a result of natural causes wake up wild and feral and are either burned or cast out of the city that they live in.
Mm-hmm. We love to see it.
We do. All right. In life, Hélène had counted many as friends and few as enemies. In her, the maternal instinct came second only to her scientific pursuits, and so she collected lost souls as a kindly fishmonger collects stray cats. Her most devoted foundling entered the waking room in a flash of gray skirt and red cap. She skidded to a stop, her arms outstretched as she attempted to regain her balance from such unaccustomed speed, the flesh of those arms as gray as the dress she wore. The Revenant had eyes only for Hélène upon the ornate crimson bier, for the darkening stain on the dress, the lifeless curl of one delicate palm. The servants had already washed the dried blood from her pale and modeling skin. Hélène's body, this close to her waking, had begun to emit the scent of dead leaves. Dr. Marie Fluette inhaled the dank perfume, though it nauseated her. "Oh, madame, I did not think to see you here so soon." The good doctor was the most famous of revenants, though she herself would wrinkle her nose and insist the proper word was infamous. In all the history of the undead crisis, Marie Fluette was the only revenant to exhibit the full faculties she'd had in life. It was a lonely position. A person such as this must take the offered hand of friendship and clutch it tight to her cold, unmoving chest. Hélène de Martine had been Marie's only confidant. All of this was at the back of Marie's race from the laboratory wing, across the breadth of the house and toward the waking room, the pain in her chest, the fear with its teeth buried deep in her mind. Marie remembered her own waking with sharp clarity, and thus had never attended another, not until today. So focused was she, her numb fingers wrapped about each other, that when a body blocked her view of Hélène, Marie shied like a startled grey horse. Embarrassment eclipsed her grief, followed swiftly by the red star of anger. "Curse you, Pierre! Get out of my way!" She shooed him away from her as if he were a fat, lazy blowfly. "How many times must I remind you that I am not a servant?" She glared, but Pierre remained obdurate. His white eyes cast down, he gestured to the beer. "Need more room, doctor." He did not look her in the eye. None of the servants ever did. Even though Marie detested the necessity of interacting with the servants, their avoidance still stung. He surveyed her, his gaze lowered, his posture deferential. Marie folded her arms across her chest and made no move to retreat. Behind him, a newly cold fist spasmed and clenched, rustling the cloth it lay upon. Hélène's time was close. The sound chilled Marie's blood, and her resolve wavered. Pierre leaned toward Marie as if to share a confidence. Unwilling, she gave him her ear. "Doctor," he said, "Thierry is here." "Ah!" Marie stepped back, scanned the room she had ignored earlier. The candles around the bier did little to brighten the large, rough-paneled room, the unpolished planks absorbing the light. Thierry watched from the angled nook of the back staircase, deep shadows dousing the corners. He likely thought himself invisible there, but to a revenant's eyes he stood out clearly. Thierry appeared smaller without his customary red coat, and he leaned against the pale papered wall as though his legs trembled. The brown stains upon his shirt matched those upon his mother's cream-colored dress. The attention of the two revenants weighed on Thierry like a mildewed blanket, and he shifted uneasy beneath it. They must have sensed his discomfort, for they retreated out of sight. For once he blessed Dr. Fluette. Though her sharp mind and diction were disgusting to him and unnatural besides, she at least had the sense to see that her kind was not welcome here. He would have glared them back to their place himself were it not for his mother's twitching, contracting shape on the bier. The slash through the familiar throat had already weathered to a thick gray scar that jumped with every sound it tried and failed to make. Secluded behind his knees, his sister Lisette knelt on polished granite, cold and slick as ice. At 13, she was small enough to deceive visitors into thinking her much younger. The day's events exaggerated the effect, softened her wide eyes, and bent her spine until she seemed half her age. Thierry knew he should pull her to her feet, take her from the waking room, spare her the sight before them. He could not. He instead lay his hand on her dark curls and watched with her. Revenants stood in a ring around the bier, a wall of red-topped gray through which Thierry could see little. The hands twitched, spasmed, grabbed with increasing purpose. The scene was eerily silent. With an abrupt start, the body on the bier sat bolt upright. Thierry cut his eyes away. He could not stand the sight of that beloved face turned gray and hideous, the eyes filmed and idiotic. Fabric rustled. The circle of revenants closed in on their newest fellow, helped her to her feet, and led her toward the door in the back, the door that opened only from this side, the door to the servants' quarters. The hinges creaked as they closed. Thierry shuddered. Lisette hid her face against his boots, and he forced his tremors to stillness. He hunkered down to face her. "Little sister, just go to bed. It'll be dark soon." Thierry's voice rasped, dry and exhausted in his throat. His hand shook butterfly light on her shoulder, and he pressed harder to make it stop. Lisette turned her head and curled away from his touch. "Someone killed Maman, Terry. Her throat is cut, and now she's gray and can't talk, and she smells like the servants." Terry frowned. The childish words were a regression, a frighteningly blank statement from his usually bubbly sister. Another tear slid down his cheek, and embarrassment at his weakness pushed his worry away. He scraped the tears away with the heel of one hand. He had wept enough for today, for many days. Did Lisette not see the blood on his shirt? Perhaps it was best she did not know his part in Mother's death, for her interrogation would open his wounds further. The confining, awkward geometry of the waking room pinched his shoulders, and he doubted he could tolerate the strange space much longer. "Thierry," he sighed. "What?" Lisette thinned her lips at his tone, but she did not allow it to stop her. Her face was flushing warmer, as if the questioning brought her back to herself. Why would someone kill Maman? Not how could they, but why? Thierry half smiled at Lisette's sharp question. She was our chief biologist, the most important person in the house. Lisette frowned. "I know that. What does Maman's job have to do with anything?" Her fingers found the lace hem of her skirt, and she began to run the edges through her fingers, as if counting on an abacus. Thierry hunkered down, putting his face on her level. "You know the job of all the houses is to solve the problem of the undead, yes?" She rolled her eyes. "Everyone knows that." She frowned. "But if Maman was working on the cure, wouldn't that make her too important to die?" His mouth in a thin line, Thierry nodded. "It does. To House Martin, she is," he swallowed, "was too important to lose. To the other houses, though, Maman was a barrier to their own advancement." He felt the snarl on his lips again, smoothed it away for Lisette's sake. Our enemies would rather the world burn. Lisette thought about this, then shook her head until her curls danced. "That's not fair." She took hold of the cuff of his shirt and tugged. She did not flinch at the cloth, stiff with dried blood. Thierry tensed, his bitter laugh choking in his throat. He longed to leave, to take the stairs 2 at a time, to slam the door to his room, to finally be alone. His manners forced that need down, despite their tattered state. What is it now? His sister's face was an indistinct heart shape in the growing dark. Why isn't Papa here? Why, indeed. Thierry had not thought himself in possession of enough energy for rage, and now found that he had been wrong. He disentangled her hand from his cuff and held it in his hands. "Father is not here because—" The words that burned Thierry's tongue accused his father of not caring for Helene. Children often misunderstood their parents, especially when their most basic natures are closely aligned. Thierry was indeed his father's son, though he repudiated all he thought Guillaume stood for. Swallowing his disgust, Thierry continued, "Because custom dictates that we stay away." Lisette's dark lashes fluttered. "But you are here." He shook his head. "I should not be, nor should you." Now he saw the wisdom in society's dictate. "Mother is gone." He swallowed past a lump of grief. "And she has been gone for hours. We prolong the pain her death causes us if we must watch her body get to its feet and walk away." And there you
go. Ooh. That shit still hits.
Yay! That's exactly what I'd like to hear.
I alluded to this earlier, but full disclosure, I mean, like, listeners, you know that most of my guests are already friends of mine. Aimee and I have been on and off, recently more off than on, critique buddies for, 7 years now? 7 and a half years?
I think, if I remember correctly, was 2014.
It. That's right. It was.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's been a minute.
It has.
It's really been a minute. Um. And yeah, I remember the first chapter of this book so clearly. I was very excited to see that you were going to be reading from this.
It is full of vibes. I mean,
It is full of them.
And I mean, that is essentially how I came up with the idea in the first place, where you know, writers hate to say this, but I had a dream where I don't remember much of it other than the vibes, where it was mostly gray and pastel, and there were zombies, but they weren't scary zombies. They were unsettling, always around you kind of zombies. And I remember like frothy white dresses and tuxedos and all of that. So it made a strong enough impression on me that I felt like I needed to take those vibes and make them words.
Yeah.
And I got a 120,000 word novel out of it.
I mean, I very rarely get that many words out of a set of vibes, so...
I don't always. This was one that still kind of sticks in my head every once in a while. So anything that's that strong is going to stick around long enough for me to make something out of it. The novel that I'm querying right now is visually kind of the opposite. It's space elves. So everything is bright, brilliant colors and green, and everything is alive. So I think, honestly, I start out most of my long pieces, at least, more as just feels than anything else, and build from there.
Yeah, I know that Space Elves predates the final season of J.R.R. Princess of Power.
Yes.
But it does... Whenever I think of Space Elves, I cannot help but think of one of the ending images. Slight spoiler for J.R.R. and the Princess of Power, which came out, like, final season came out 2 years ago, listeners. But there's this ending image of, you know, the big bad's invading spaceship getting turned into this huge tree, and like that is indelibly linked in my head with your space elves.
There are absolutely living FTL tree ships, so
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. That's exactly what I had in my head.
It's good stuff. It's real good stuff. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about sort of this novel's journey beyond the initial vibes to 120k words.
Sure. This a section of this novel actually is what got me into Viable Paradise in 2016, and from there, I mean, the experience of being at Viable Paradise would be hard to overemphasize how important it was to my writing career. Like, I remember every second of that week and a half, and it was worth every penny and worth all the stress and anxiety. And I got to spend time with a lot of really fabulous authors, both, you know, the instructors and the people that I went to the workshop with, including like John Appel and Karen Osborne and Valerie Valdes, people who've gone on to sell novels and do well with them. And from that, I realized pretty early on that because my reading habits are almost entirely novels, my personal rhythms lend themselves more to novels. So I will start a short story, and it doesn't even finish clearing its throat by the first 4,000 words. So it was a matter of just sitting down with it and figuring out where I wanted to go. And I'm a pretty obsessive plotter. And I've gotten more so since I started using Scrivener exclusively for novel-length projects. I make a beat sheet that I'm using, and then I transfer that into Scrivener, and I write up a short summary of what I expect every scene to include. And I put that in as a separate little file in Scrivener so that I can move it around or do whatever I want with it. And I don't always stick exactly to it. I mean, there's
mood.
there are characters that just do things that it no longer makes sense. Like the changes propagate out. Just like with any piece of art that's somewhat linear. It's like you change something and then 2 chapters on, it does not make at all sense for your main character to be doing the thing you have them doing. So there's stuff that needs to be adjusted. But for me, it's really important to know what I'm going to sit down and write that day so that I don't spend the first hour trying to figure out what that is. I just have it there. And from that, I did, like you saw at least a few of these chapters before I called it done. And I sent it off to beta readers. Did you beta read this for me, Hillary?
I think that I started beta reading it and then life happened.
It happens a lot, doesn't it?
It happens a lot. I certainly remember at least the first, 5 or 6 chapters vaguely.
Right.
And the first 2 chapters extremely strongly.
Excellent. Yeah, and so once I got my comments back from beta readers, I probably did another 2 or 3 revisions after that, just because I felt like I was taking on a lot. I was seriously attempting to do omniscient voice when that is not really a huge thing these days. People tend to write more visually than omniscient really likes, and it's kind of it's something that now at my current state I feel like I might be able to take on, but it's hard. It's hard to know how to make those transitions in a natural way so that it ends up not feeling like head hopping. There's some of that you can't avoid. I mean, it's like people are used to reading close third or first person. They're not used to a hovering narrator that sits over top of everything and knows what's going on everywhere. But also it's just really difficult to do right.
Yeah, so far this year I've reread the first 3, I want to say, Earthsea books, and I'm in the middle of I just got to Lothlorien, so kind of the middle of book 2 of the 6 books of Lord of the Rings.
Yep.
So having a lot of that sort of older style of omniscient narration going on, and it's just even leaving aside all of the other hard work that Le Guin and Tolkien did, that is hard work.
So hard. I'm actually for research purposes reading a lot of Jane Austen right now. And it's fascinating to me how different the prose style is, and yet how incredibly easy it is to read. I feel like I'm either learning a lot of new things or I'm unlearning some things that I didn't need to learn as a result of reading that. And I was talking with Karen Osborne on her Twitch stream about how writers these days have grown up on TV and movies a lot more than they've grown up on books. So novels tend to read more cinematically than they need to. And I said something about us needing to figure out what needs to be described and what needs to be inferred. And that line is difficult. And it really depends on the style you're choosing to write in, and also just your own personal style. Like, I tend to write things that, at least in novels so far, I tend to write things that are a little closer to, like, Lord of the Rings in terms of language. And
Lord of the Rings, the book.
Lord of the Rings, the book, not the movie.
Yeah.
I like my descriptive prose and emotional characters. But the story that I published most recently in Translunar Traveler's Lounge called Fractured, that one has a very different perspective and different voice, even though it's still my voice. It's just what comes out when I'm trying to write something that I can't remember who said this, but somebody referred to, like, the voice of the Murderbot novels by Martha Wells as first person asshole. Yeah. And that's kind of what I was
Val,
going for.
maybe?
That is entirely possible. It is it's an extremely fun voice to work in, and it's easy to get your audience on your side. Because everybody likes those snarky little voices when they're not pointed at you.
Yeah, that's the other touch point that I was thinking, both in terms of, like, not necessarily first person asshole, but like limited third person asshole. That also I was thinking of because of your reading from Tilted is the Locked Tomb series.
Oh yeah,
which is, like, you know, extremely logged in, extremely snarky.
Yep.
And, you know, and has spooky, scary skeletons in it.
It's one of the books that it's hard to pin down exactly what it is. It's almost like a magical serendipity of a book where you've got the vibes that just resonate from the very pages, especially if you've got the ones that are sprayed black on the edges.
Yeah.
The absolute snark that just about everyone wishes they could come up with on spur of the moment. There's so much to appreciate in that novel, and I was so pleased that with the second novel she managed to not only to in some places replicate what she did, but also expand on it and make it different and even more experimental in a way. Like, how often do you see second person done well in popular novels? Plenty of times in fanfic, but not
even like second person done well in a limited way, but like second person done well for half the chapters.
Yes.
And to be switching back and forth between second person and third person limited is... I was just very much, like, on for the ride, but when we got to the turning point where it suddenly came together, like, oh, this is why that's happening, I was so mad. I was, like, just scream. Not because I was mad at the plot, not that I was mad at the content of the plot, I was mad at the plot for doing that thing very well.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to take that to the extreme, the use of second person in N.K. Jemisin's Broken Earth series was just absolutely brilliant. Like, when I figured out what she was doing in there, I'm old enough. I'm nearly 50. I'm old enough that second person does not read as it would to somebody who's in their 20s, and that's just natural. But once I figured out what she was doing with it, I was on board 100%. Same with Anne Leckie's The Raven Tower.
Oh, yeah.
Where it took me a while to figure it out, but as soon as I figured out why she'd done it that way, I devoured the book.
Yeah.
So I love when authors can take something unusual and do it technically well for a related reason. Like, it's not there just to show off. It's there for a reason.
Yeah. I mean, they are also showing off, but that's ancillary.
Yes. Who wouldn't? Who wouldn't show off if you've got that?
Yeah. Or maybe it's ancillary justice?
Or ancillary, depending on who you're talking to.
Or ancillary, yep. Yeah. So many good books.
Yes.
Like,
we could go on for hours talking.
We could. Yeah. Yeah. I was also, like, something you said earlier made me think about an essay that I've been noodling on for, like, a good bit at this point. I don't remember exactly how long. Time is fake. Who knows? But I got the urge to reread Lord of the Rings from somewhere. I think part of my brain was just like, my dude, it's been over 20 years. You got to do this now. And I was like, damn, you're right. Like, I have not. The last time I read The Lord of the Rings was before the first or at least before I saw the first movie.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Granted, I didn't see the first movie until, like, literally the summer after it came out in a tiny little second-run theater in, like, somewhere in backwoods South Jersey at, like, 9 p.m. or something. Because my friend was like, dude, you haven't seen Lord of the Rings yet? I bet it's still showing somewhere. We should go. And I was like, okay, let's do that then. Yep.
It's such a beautiful piece of work.
It really is, and it's really annoying. It's deeply, deeply annoying to me also, because I started, like... I started rereading the book, and then I was like, well, I've got the first film free streaming. Like, I don't even have to pull out... Like, I already own it from some point back streaming. I don't have to pull out a DVD player. Like, I have got the extended editions of everything. But, like... So I started watching it, and then I was like, oh no, I have to write an essay about this, because... Like, part of it is just my sensibilities around the things I want out of stories, and one of the things I want out of stories is, like, I really dig deeply unsettling atmosphere. And, like, the first... Honestly, I'm in Lothlorien, and the creep factor has not yet stopped in terms of, first, the pursuit of Frodo by the Nine, and then the pursuit by Sméagol, by Gollum. Like, all through Moria.
It doesn't let up.
Into Lothlorien, and, like, the film does actually, like, touch on the Gollum thing in Moria a little bit, but, like, everything is so compressed in there.
Yeah.
And it really, you know, I get why it happened, just like I understand why they had to have, like, a cave troll boss fight and, you know, all this, like, you know, very epic cinematic stuff that, like, yeah, cool battles, but it's not getting the point that Tolkien was trying to make.
They're such different mediums. Like,
yeah,
you can't tell the same story, even when in a movie or a novel, even if you're using the exact same list of facts and characters and plot points, they're not going to be the same.
Mm-hmm.
And because I have an acting degree, I have yes, I do have an acting degree. I have an unusual perspective on that, because I know why. The main reason for me that novels end up feeling so different and are better at telling some stories than movies, and vice versa. There are some things that you just can't communicate easily. It comes down to what novels are good at. And novels are incredibly good at interiority and communicating character through a thought process that when you put it on a screen, you end up having things like the narration in Blade Runner, which is entirely unnecessary and makes the movie much better when you take it out. Because you don't need it. You have an actor to convey that. You have visuals that you simply don't have in novels, and you can move faster and often need to move faster because of your audience and their expectations. You sit down with a 500-page novel, you're not going to expect it to take you 2.5 hours to read through the way you expect a movie to take 2.5 hours. There are a lot of different expectations you have to play to, and restrictions that you have to take into account.
Hopefully I can actually finish this essay and then like get it picked up by somebody, but
I would 100% read it.
The ultimate point I got to, I play off of the "Wow, cool robot" meme, which for listeners who aren't familiar, it's a picture of a giant mecha Gundam shooting a missile over the head of the viewer stand-in, and the trail of the missile says "War is bad," and the viewer has like a painted-on sightline looking at the robot and a word bubble, "Wow, cool robot." And the ultimate conclusion I came to was like, Miyazaki would have made a better Lord of the Rings, at least in the way of like capturing Tolkien's spirit, than Peter Jackson did, and certainly a better Hobbit.
Oh God!
Like, we can all agree that the Hobbit movies were bad. I like them. I am not a defender of them.
To be completely honest, I have not seen them because I couldn't make myself.
There are some good bits. There are some bits that are cool that they're in there but do not belong in the movie of The Hobbit.
Yep.
There are some absolutely stupid bits that were added because capitalism.
Why must capitalism ruin everything?
Why must capitalism? It ruins everything. I am not a defender of those movies as a whole. I am a staunch defender of the. There's a sequence where where Gandalf goes to Dol Guldur that's actually on film, and that gets the spook on. That has like some like fucking H.P. Lovecraft Shadow Out of Time vibes to it. Which, like, fuck H.P. Lovecraft. The Shadow Out of Time is one of the scariest stories I've ever written, or ever read.
Yes, absolutely. Lovecraft, despite his many, many failings, had just an incredible grasp of communicating his horror. Because that is what writing is, right? Like, you're communicating, you're trying to put the part of you that has come up with these things into somebody else's head. And damn, he was good at that. Despite the purple prose and the racism, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and like, you know, there are plenty of people smarter than me who have said a lot of really great things about how hard it is to separate the racism from the whole idea of cosmic horror, and like I agree with that. And I think because of being a queer person, I deeply identify with the fear of the other as from the end of the other.
Oh yeah. There's a reason. One of the people have been lately coming out with some really interesting takes on cosmic horror, like Premia Muhammad's series and Ruthanna Emrys' novel that is 100% told from the point of view of the other, and it works so well. And she is so very clearly knowledgeable on Lovecraft lore that it's hard to be bothered by it, at least in my point of view, because she manages to deal with the racism without it becoming the reason for the horror.
Right.
Unless it's because you're the other who is having people being racist towards you. It's a brilliant reversal of the perspective of something that she obviously loves, but doesn't love the source or connotations of it.
Yeah. Yeah, we had a very abbreviated little chat about that when Ruthanna was on this show a couple of months ago, and and I now I'm like, man, I have to have Premia on to talk about cosmic horror again. Like,
she's pretty brilliant. I would absolutely listen to that episode.
Yeah. There is there's just so much good going on in new books.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. It's incredible. I love it. So I just heard this weird sound, and this blue police box showed up in the room, the podcast room. And I was wondering if we could, at this point, take a step into this time machine and go back if there was any words of wisdom that you could offer your younger writer self.
Oh, man. I think the things that I would suggest to myself is always read the piece after you've written it. Read it out loud, because you find so many things that otherwise your eyes just skim over, but you can't do that when you're reading out loud. And I find that because of my acting background, I like to put a voice in there. I like to try to have a continuity of emotional experience through the dialogue. And reading it out loud forces me to see places where I've made some discontinuity, perhaps for plot reasons or something like that. And that kind of thing is so important to me that even though it takes a long time to read a 100,000-word novel out loud to yourself, it's 100% worth it, and it'll save you at least half a draft, I think.
It will. It absolutely will. This was something that I was like, a lot of my creative writing professors in college talked about this, and I was so resistant to it for so long. Like, the only things I would read out loud when writing them were like, when I took intro creative writing, I would read the poetry I was writing out loud, because like, you can't like, maybe you can, maybe somebody can. I cannot write poetry without hearing it.
Yeah, it's
because
music.
It is it's the whole point of it is the flow of the words and the shape of the words and the shape that they make in your mouth and in your brain. And it took me so long to realize, like, oh no, you actually do have to read your prose out loud.
Yeah.
And I honestly don't know, because, like, my brain is a scrambled egg, whether or not I started reading things out loud before or after I started podcasting. But, like, boy, let me tell you, making a podcast gets you real used to the sound of your voice real fast, and you stop caring about how it actually sounds.
Oh,
and
yeah.
You're just like, you're getting it out there.
Yeah, it's different than, say, like, if I'm doing a performance, if I'm narrating a novel or a short story or whatever. I'm not putting a performance out there. It doesn't have to sound perfect. If I stumble over a word, I will make sure that the music of the phrase is the way I want it to be. But because it's in print, and I mean, this is a side statement, but I when I read, I don't necessarily hear the words in my head. I don't have as much of an internal voice as some people do. To me, it's the shape of the words and the shape of the letters and the shape of the prose on the page that that, like, there are parts of Frank Herbert's Dune that I can recall exactly where things are on the page, because that's how my mind works. But if I going back to reading aloud, if I read it out loud, I can't skip over anything. And I don't have to sound good. I know how to read these things so that they sound like a performance, but they don't have to be. They just have to get out there so that I can see the dumb things that I have done and fix them.
I want to touch on that a little bit more, because you are somebody who has performed things and who has narrated things for audio. For instance, I never get the title of it right. It's How I Be Queen of Coruscating Night.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And No Shit,
originally
there
printed
I was.
in No Shit, There I Was.
Yes.
Has an unpronounceable sword name that you still managed to carry off brilliantly.
I figured it out. It was definitely a story where I got the piece and I was like, are you serious? And I've actually talked to Matt Dovey and the other author whose name escapes me right now.
Stuart Baker.
Thank you, Stuart Baker. I talked to them and they both apologized for having given me an unpronounceable name, but it was so much fun to read. It's like deeply fun, and man, if they ever were interested in having me read again for them, I would jump on it.
Yeah. So do you have any advice for people who are maybe thinking about getting into narration, or even just thinking about, like, how they can, they might have a reading at some point. They want to be able to deal with that. They just, like, these are widely applicable skills.
They are. I mean, most writers will at some point be asked to do a reading. And, one of the things that people are most terrified of is public speaking. And reading your own work feels like baring your chest to a whole room full of people you've never met before. It's terrifying. But for me, the things that I do before I read something is I will sit down and read it through at least a few times before the day of. And I will go through and mark up the piece of text with, okay, this particular sentence is a little difficult to enunciate properly. So slow down, be aware of what's going on. This character here, even though there's no dialogue tag, this is that character, so don't give him the scratchy voiced character. This is the smooth voiced character. So that sort of note to myself is really helpful and takes some of the anxiety involved in reading something cold out. I also, and I don't know if this is just experience in doing readings or remnants of my theater time, but I work at being able to read past what I am currently saying. And that keeps me from stumbling. And it's a skill that is absolutely worth developing, I think, if you're a writer, because any time that you have any sort of in-person public experience like this, even a podcast, having something up there to read through is really helpful in keeping you from sounding like a stammering idiot sometimes. And the more you stumble over yourself, the more anxious you're going to be. So practice, make sure you have water.
Drink water.
And yes. And do your best to mark out the things that might trip you up so that you have a chance of seeing it before they actually trip you. I think those are a really good starter places.
Which also comes back to like what we were talking about earlier of like you have to read things out loud. You have to practice. Like,
you
do. It is not wasted time, however much it feels like, oh, I don't want to spend the extra time on this. It is vital.
Yep. And to be completely honest, reading from a piece of paper is so much easier and takes so much less time than memorizing Shakespeare.
Yeah.
So to me, this is like a cakewalk, but also it's so I don't have to work as much as if like I'm memorizing a soliloquy, but I do need to practice, even as somebody who's thoroughly comfortable on stage and doesn't have too much trouble reading my own work. I picked the piece from Tilted a couple days ago, and I sat down and read through it, made sure I had a reasonable amount of time. And did the whole like marking things and the occasional cringe at like, why did I repeat that word 4 times in that paragraph? But you know, that's what happens.
That's the Tales from the Trunk experience. That is like essential trunk cast.
Should have read it out loud more.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is a lot easier to read things off the page than like even something that you might have had memorized for a decade. Like,
yeah,
I would much rather get up in front of people and like print it out at a font that you can read reasonably well.
Yes,
like
way better to have 50 pages of 24-point font than 1 page of 10-point. Oh God, because losing your place.
An iPad or an e-reader or something, like really great. When I was on Story Hour, however long ago that was, like I just had my Kindle out, and you know, luckily I already had the ebook I was reading my story from Skies of Wonder, and an Isle of Wight production.
Indeed.
But like, you know, I normally read at like a 12-point font or something, but for that I was like, no, fuck it. Like 18-point, 20-point, like make this easy.
Yep.
That's so much easier than like, I've known the Raven for 20 years and like will do voices and everything, but like I'd still rather just read off a page.
Right. It's much easier. The times that I find it's important that it's memorized are not times that I think writers ever need to run into.
Yeah.
Like even if you're on you know the worst possible outlet being on television, they don't expect writers to be like Castle
Articulate?
in the TV show, like where you get them on stage and they're the life of the party and they are charisma oozing from them. That's not what they expect from us. It's just best to like allow that to just relax. They can take care of you.
Yeah. Yeah. I turned the charisma on specifically for the podcast.
Oh yeah.
And nobody's watching me except my guests. And then I get off and I go straight back into gremlin mode. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that, like, you gotta do that.
Yeah, it as an introvert, a very significant introvert, I can put it on. I can be very personable and social, and then as soon as it's done, I have to collapse for the next day.
Yeah. Yeah. Listeners who don't know me, like, outside of, which I assume is, like, a lot of you who don't, like, know me outside of the podcast might be surprised that I am, like, you know, who I am on this podcast and who I am on Twitter are not the regular me. Like, I absolutely pop off at the mouth with stupid shit in my life the same way I do on Twitter, but I don't do it to, like, the world.
No, that's exhausting.
It's utterly even Twitter is exhausting.
Yes. I recently tweeted something in support of trans rights, and you
can't be doing that.
I know, right? And I started getting TERFs in my mentions, and I just, like, I'd argue with you, but it's not worth it, and you guys have fun. I block.
Yeah. Yeah. So, a couple of quick questions before we get going. First, do you have anything coming out from your own work that you're excited to let our listeners know about?
Well, right now I'm actually working on it's turning out to be like a Twitch stream that I'm going to make into YouTube videos called Fix My Fight Scene. And
nice.
I am going to go onto Twitch and talk about how I write fight scenes and take questions. And I've had at least one person offer to let me use a trunked piece as the center of a show,
Fantastic.
Which would be great. And I'm really looking forward to that. I should have that out hopefully before Worldcon, which I will be at as well. So
excellent. So that will be presumably up before this episode goes up in mid-late September.
That is the plan. There should be at least one thing, and if it turns out to be as easy as I think it's going to be, I'm hoping to do one a week. Especially if I can get enough people interested in hanging out and talking with me, it's going to be great.
Mm-hmm. We'll talk more about this after the show, but you should definitely link up with KB Wagers about that.
I'd love to.
Because they are also have a lot of martial arts experience and write a mean fight scene.
Nice. All over that.
Yeah. Listeners, as always, links will be in the show notes. And I'm super looking forward to tuning into that myself, because one of the things we didn't really get a chance to touch on was your martial arts experience. But like, you've helped me out with a fight scene before. Yep. It's invaluable.
It is really difficult to... I find that having a subject matter expert is always important, right? Mm-hmm. But for something that's as physical as martial arts and as chaotic, and you also have to keep in mind that there are enough people out there who are aficionados of martial arts who will just shake their finger and lose suspension of disbelief if you can't do it right. I've run into that myself a few times in novels that I otherwise really enjoyed, where it's just like, oh no, sadness.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not gonna shake my finger at anyone who gets like the details of a type of sword wrong, especially when they're writing fantasy. Like I'm not going to be like the guys who read spy thrillers screaming about the type of ammunition you use in your Glock, whatever. Right. But if you run into physical impossibilities, if you do something that I, as someone who has not, I have never worked with like live steel, but I have worked hard stick sparring, and that's you get that wrong, you get hurt. And so I know what, if you do something that, like, I know what will happen.
Yeah.
If you tried to do that, what you just said happened would not happen. It would be this. And it's hard not to focus on that. So that's why we reach out to people who know things we don't know as writers and get more information.
Super, super useful. I quit after 2 episodes because I was like, oh, this is just propaganda. I don't really want to vibe with it more, but I watched the first 2 episodes of the Netflix Ghost in the Shell 2045 or whatever it is, and it's, like, it's regular classic Ghost in the Shell, also a cop story. Like, we just have to accept that and, like, maybe just leave it in the past. But there was one, and, like, most of it was just, like, bang bang gun porn stuff, but there was one up close altercation that just took like 2 seconds or something on screen that was amazingly well done. And like, I was like, I know that wasn't specifically this Aikido technique, but it got to, like, Aikido is just like, oh, sensei had studied all the other martial arts and was like, I like this and this and this from these different things.
Yep.
And like, it's not unique to Aikido to like pin somebody to the ground and have one elbow, like one arm, all the way up over their head. Like, that's just a regular grappling thing.
It is.
But the fact that they did it in such a like smooth, believable way was like, okay, someone on this like animation team knows and cares, and that really is great.
Yeah. Huge props to anyone who actually brings in real fight choreographers and
especially
listens
in
to
animation.
them. Yeah, because that's not a thing that you have to do. Like, it's all drawings. It's not real. None of this is real, and yet it makes it makes it sink in as real more when you take care of little details like that.
Yeah. Second, after I just gave a kind of anti-recommendation, is there anything that you've been reading, listening to, watching, or playing that you are just super jazzed about and want listeners all the way in middle September of 2022 to know about and check out?
Oh, wow. Well, like I said, I've been reading a lot of Jane Austen. I just finished Sense and Sensibility, which is probably, it's not the best of her novels. It's one of her earlier ones, but it's the one that is closest to my heart because of the movie that was out back in, I think, the early 2000s with Emma Thompson and just absolutely brilliant. Kate Winslet makes me cry every time I see it, and because I feel like I am that character, but also it's a, like, I saw somebody talking about the Netflix adaptation of Persuasion, which is not getting great reviews, but they also pointed out that if this is your gateway drug to getting into Jane Austen, then it can be your gateway drug. Like Clueless is a Jane Austen adaptation.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with finding your own way into the classics. I just finished reading What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my God, is that good? It's a Fall of the House of Usher redo, and it's so good. She just has this skill of being like making me want to throw the book across the room because she's creeped me the hell out. It's amazing. Yeah.
I love a book that does that.
Yeah.
When we are recording this, we are sitting on the cusp of Sarah Gailey's Just Like Home actually releasing. And as I've said numerous times, mostly not to brag, but also a little bit to brag, I got to read an arc of the book, and I was terrified to be reading it in broad daylight. It is that good and that scary, and like people who manage that are so amazing.
Yeah. I remember seeing Gailey did a tweet thread that was clearly just mostly a little teaser for the book coming out, and it's so good. It's so creepy and gross, but you can feel every like slimy inch of what's talking about. It's It's great. I love it. I love that stuff. I will watch those and read those forever.
Yeah.
Give me the goosebumps.
Yeah. So good. Aimee, before we get going, finally, where can our listeners find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Aimee Kuzenski, my first name and my last name, all one word, and Martial Artiste on Twitch. If you look up
Fantastic.
Fix My Fight Scene, you will find the YouTube channel. So I will be out there.
Excellent. And as always, listeners, links will be in the show notes, especially now that I've like fixed my workflow so that I can make show notes much more seamlessly. It's revolutionary. I'll probably talk about it on Twitter or something at some point.
Fun.
Aimee, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been such a delight.
Thank you so much, Hillary. This has been great.
Absolutely. Listeners, stick around next month when Aidan Muir will be joining us on book tour, and somebody else will be on for the other episode, but I don't know who, because this is July, and I have not hammered out all of my guests for the next half a year yet. Tales from the Trunk is mixed and produced in beautiful Oakland, California. Our theme music is Paper Wings by Lillian Boyd. You can support the show on Patreon at patreon.com/trunkcast. All patrons of the show now get a sticker and logo button, along with show outtakes and other content that can't be found anywhere else. You can find the show on Twitter at Trunkcast, and I tweet at HBBisnieks. If you like the show, consider taking a moment to rate and review us on your preferred podcast platform. And remember, don't self-reject.